In the 9th century, England was not a kingdom. There was no single crown, no unified people, no shared destiny. There were only fragile realms torn by ambition, haunted by fear, bordered by cold, restless seas. Across those waters came a new kind of threat. The Vikings were coming, not as raiders but as conquerors, settlers, kings in waiting. History often tells these stories through heroes of battle, men remembered for fire, blood, and legend. But this is the story of a different kind of king, a ruler who acted in silence, a king who chose compromise over conquest, a king who relinquished power when others would have clutched it. His name was Æthelwulf. For nearly 20 years he held Wessex together, a kingdom that should have fallen. When Alfred later became the Great, it was because Æthelwulf had already done the hard, invisible work. This is not the story of glory. This is the story of survival. To understand Æthelwulf, you have to forget the idea of England. In the early 800s, the island of Britain was divided into rival kingdoms: Northumbria in the north, Mercia in the center, East Anglia along the eastern coast, and Wessex in the south. These kingdoms did not think of themselves as one people. Loyalty was local, power was personal. A king ruled because others accepted him until they didn't. There were no standing armies, no permanent capitals, no fixed borders. Rule depended on reputation, military success, and the belief that God favored your reign. At the same time, the old Roman roads were crumbling, literacy was rare, and news traveled slowly. A crisis could destroy a kingdom before help ever arrived. This was the world Æthelwulf inherited. Not a nation to govern, but a fragile structure that could collapse from one bad decision, one failed harvest, or one successful Viking landing. Stability was not expected. By the time Æthelwulf came to power, the Viking threat had evolved. Earlier generations remembered sudden coastal raids, ships appearing, monasteries burning, and attackers vanishing back into the sea. But this was something new. Viking armies were staying. They overwintered on English soil. They returned to the same rivers and coastlines year after year. They learned where kingdoms were weak and when kings were distracted. Monasteries were not just religious centers. They were libraries, treasuries, and symbols of order. Their destruction sent shockwaves through society. Trade slowed. Fear spread inland. And every ruler faced the same question. Do you fight constantly and risk exhaustion, or do you adapt and risk being called weak? Most kings chose war. Æthelwulf would choose something far more dangerous: patience. Æthelwulf was not shaped only by war. Unlike many warrior kings, he had deep ties to the church. He was educated, literate by the standards of his age, and closely connected to bishops and clergy. This mattered. In a world where most rulers relied solely on force, Æthelwulf believed legitimacy mattered just as much. That faith could stabilize what swords could not. To some nobles, this made him thoughtful and wise. To others, it made him dangerous. Because a king who listens to priests, to advisors, to his sons, is a king who challenges the traditional image of absolute authority. Æthelwulf ruled not as a conqueror but as a caretaker. And caretakers are often misunderstood by history. When Æthelwulf became king in 839, Wessex stood at a crossroads. To the north, rival kingdoms were unstable. To the east, Viking forces were probing deeper each year. Internally, succession was always uncertain. Sons fought brothers, and civil war destroyed dynasties. Æthelwulf understood something rare for his time: that the greatest danger to Wessex might not come from the sea, but from within. So he planned differently. He prepared his sons for rule. He shared authority. He strengthened religious and political alliances across Europe. And instead of chasing glory, he focused on continuity. This approach would confuse his contemporaries. It would frustrate later historians, but it would save Wessex. And over the next 2 decades, as the rest of England fractured, Æthelwulf's quiet decisions would shape the future of an entire nation, without ever demanding credit. The story has begun. The crown Æthelwulf inherited was heavier than it looked. Wessex had grown powerful under his father, but power brought new dangers. Success made the kingdom a target. Viking leaders knew that richer lands meant better rewards. Rivals knew that a strong Wessex threatened their independence. Æthelwulf did not rule from a distant capital. He moved constantly between royal estates, fortified towns, and religious centers, maintaining loyalty face to face. Kingship was personal. Absence meant weakness. Every decision carried consequences. Raise taxes and nobles might rebel. Ignore the church and divine legitimacy would be questioned. March the army too often, and the fields would go unharvested. This was not a world of simple choices. Æthelwulf ruled knowing that failure would not be remembered kindly. There were no second chances, and history offered no sympathy for kings who lost control. Yet from the beginning, his reign shows careful balance rather than impulse. He was not reacting to events. He was managing them. Despite his reputation as a peaceful ruler, Æthelwulf did fight. Several Viking armies struck southern England during his reign. Some were met with force. Others were driven off through negotiation or delayed until conditions favored Wessex. There were battles, there were casualties, there were victories, but none became epic. No single clash defined his rule. No famous last stands entered popular memory. And in a culture that prized heroic storytelling, this worked against him. Later chroniclers preferred kings who won spectacularly or died dramatically. Æthelwulf did neither. Instead, he focused on defense. Coastal areas were reinforced. Armies were raised when necessary and dismissed when they became a burden. He avoided chasing enemy forces deep into unfamiliar territory, where defeat could be catastrophic. This kind of warfare was cautious, and caution rarely inspires songs, but it kept Wessex intact. Religion was not separate from politics in Æthelwulf's world. The church provided education, record-keeping, and international connections. Bishops advised kings. Monasteries preserved knowledge, and belief shaped how people understood success and failure. Æthelwulf leaned into this reality. He supported churches financially. He granted land to religious institutions. He treated clerics as partners in governance, not ornaments of power. To modern eyes, this may look like superstition. To his contemporaries, it was strategy. Faith created unity in a fractured society. It offered moral authority when military strength alone was not enough. Æthelwulf understood that a king who ruled only by force ruled briefly. A king who ruled with legitimacy endured. One of Æthelwulf's most unusual decisions was to prepare his sons openly for power. In an age where heirs were often kept distant or eliminated, this was risky. But Æthelwulf believed continuity mattered more than personal dominance. He gave his sons authority early. He allowed them to rule regions. He exposed them to leadership before crisis demanded it. This was not generosity. It was insurance. If he died suddenly, Wessex would not fall into chaos. If Vikings struck while he was away, command would not collapse. Few kings thought this far ahead. Even fewer trusted their children enough to share power. This decision would shape the future of England more than any single battle. Strength is often misunderstood in history. We remember the loudest victories, the sharpest swords, the kings who burned brightest and disappeared fastest. Æthelwulf represented something else: restraint, planning, endurance. He ruled in a time when collapse was normal, when kingdoms vanished within a generation, when survival itself was an achievement. By the end of his first decade on the throne, Wessex still stood, not expanded dramatically, not glorified endlessly, but stable. And in the ninth century, stability was power. As the story continues, Æthelwulf will make a decision so unexpected that it will shock his nobles, unsettle his enemies, and permanently alter how history judges him. A decision no king was expected to make, and very few ever dared. Wessex did not exist in isolation. Every decision its king made sent ripples across southern Britain. Mercia still held influence in the center of the island. East Anglia faced constant pressure from across the sea. Northumbria struggled with internal instability. For Æthelwulf, diplomacy mattered as much as defense. Open conflict with neighboring kingdoms would have drained resources and invited Viking opportunism. Cooperation, however uneasy, bought time. This balance of power was fragile. Alliances shifted with marriages, rivalries, and sudden deaths. A single miscalculation could turn a neighbor into an enemy overnight. Æthelwulf's reign avoided large-scale wars with other English kingdoms not by accident, but by intention. Peace was not passive. It was maintained. There was no single seat of power in Wessex. The king traveled constantly, holding court wherever he stayed. Governance moved with him. Decisions were made in halls, churches, and open fields. This mobility was necessary, but exhausting. It required visibility. Loyalty had to be reinforced in person. Justice had to be seen, not merely declared. Æthelwulf embraced this system rather than resisting it. He understood that absence bred rebellion, and distance weakened authority. His presence reassured nobles and clergy alike. Power in this world was proximity. War was not the only threat to survival. Raids disrupted farming. Trade routes were unsafe. Coinage circulation slowed as insecurity spread. A hungry kingdom could not fight or pray. Æthelwulf's administration worked to keep local economies functioning. Royal estates supported food distribution. Church lands helped stabilize supplies during poor harvests. These measures were unglamorous, but they mattered. A kingdom does not fall only to swords. It collapses when daily life becomes impossible. Æthelwulf governed with this understanding. Reputation mattered deeply in early medieval rule. A king's image determined loyalty. Stories spread faster than truth. Victories were exaggerated. Failures were magnified. Æthelwulf did not cultivate legend. He did not commission heroic poetry. He did not shape his reign for storytellers. This choice would cost him later, because history remembers what is repeated. And Æthelwulf allowed his work to speak quietly instead. By the middle of his reign, Æthelwulf had achieved something rare. Wessex was intact. No civil war had broken out. No catastrophic defeat had ended his rule. His sons were prepared. His nobles remained largely loyal. This was success, even if it did not look like triumph. But stability has a cost, and the longer peace lasts, the more dangerous change becomes. Soon, Æthelwulf would face a choice no Anglo-Saxon king was expected to make. A choice that would test loyalty, faith, and the very definition of kingship. The decision was not forced by defeat. It came from conviction, and when he made it, everything would change. Success can be dangerous. By the mid-840s, Wessex had avoided collapse longer than many expected, and that created a new problem. Nobles grew confident. Rivals grew cautious. Expectations began to rise. A king who survives is praised briefly. A king who survives too long is questioned. Why wasn't Wessex expanding? Why weren't enemies crushed completely? Why did the king seem more concerned with order than dominance? Æthelwulf felt this pressure. Not openly, not dramatically, but it was there. A quiet tension beneath the surface of stability. In early medieval politics, perception mattered almost as much as reality. A ruler seen as cautious could be interpreted as weak, even when his decisions were keeping the kingdom alive. This was the paradox of Æthelwulf's reign. The very choices that protected Wessex also made his authority easier to doubt. Succession was the silent nightmare of every king. Too often, a ruler's death triggered chaos. Brothers fought brothers. Nobles chose sides. Vikings exploited the disorder. Æthelwulf refused to leave this to chance. He continued to elevate his sons not symbolically but practically. They governed regions, led forces, issued decisions. This was unprecedented trust, and it came with risks. A powerful son could become a rival. A popular heir could attract support too early. History was filled with kings undone by their own children. Yet Æthelwulf persisted, because a divided succession would undo everything he had built. This decision planted the seeds of future tension, but also future survival. Wessex was not isolated from Europe. Christian kingdoms across the continent watched each other closely. Kings sought legitimacy through recognition, marriage, and faith. Æthelwulf understood this international dimension. Connections beyond Britain strengthened his position at home. Recognition abroad reinforced authority within. Faith was the common language, and through faith, Æthelwulf saw opportunity, not escape but reinforcement. An idea began to take shape, one that no one around him expected. At some point, Æthelwulf considered a possibility almost no king dared to imagine: leaving, not abandoning his throne, but stepping away from it temporarily. A pilgrimage. For ordinary believers, pilgrimage was an act of devotion. For kings, it was nearly unthinkable. Power was fragile. Absence invited rebellion. Yet Æthelwulf believed something radical. That faith could strengthen authority rather than weaken it. That legitimacy earned abroad could stabilize rule at home. And that his kingdom, carefully prepared, might survive without him. This idea ran against every expectation of kingship, and that made it dangerous. By the late 840s, the decision was no longer theoretical. Æthelwulf was serious. He did not announce it dramatically. He did not frame it as retreat or surrender. He prepared quietly, deliberately, methodically. Power was arranged, authority delegated, stability reinforced. This was not escape. It was confidence. A king certain enough in his work to leave it behind temporarily without fear of immediate collapse. Few rulers ever reach that point. Fewer still act on it. As word began to spread, unease followed. Nobles worried. Rivals watched closely. The question hung unspoken across Wessex: what kind of king walks away at the height of his reign? The answer would redefine how Æthelwulf was remembered, and how history would misunderstand him. When Æthelwulf's intention became known, it unsettled nearly everyone. A king leaving his realm voluntarily was almost unheard of. Power was not something you set down. It was something you guarded relentlessly, because once lost, it rarely returned. Nobles feared instability. Warriors feared missed opportunities. Clergy, though more sympathetic, worried about timing. Vikings did not pause their ambitions for pilgrimages. And yet Æthelwulf did not waver. He framed the journey not as absence but as purpose. This was not abandonment. It was an act meant to strengthen Wessex spiritually and politically. Still, doubt lingered. Some wondered if this decision revealed weakness. Others suspected hidden motives. A few quietly prepared for what might come next, just in case the king never returned. This was the risk Æthelwulf accepted. Not the risk of defeat in battle, but the risk of being misunderstood. Æthelwulf did not leave chaos behind him. Before departing, he ensured governance would continue smoothly. Authority was divided carefully among his sons. Regional control was clarified. Military readiness remained intact. This preparation was critical. A kingdom does not survive absence through hope, it survives through structure. Æthelwulf trusted what he had built. He believed that a prepared system could endure without constant oversight. That loyalty, once established, could hold. This belief separated him from many rulers of his age. Most kings feared that without their presence, their power would dissolve. Æthelwulf believed his power was already embedded in the kingdom itself. When Æthelwulf finally set out, there was no spectacle, no grand farewell, no public display of authority, just a small royal party moving south and east toward the continent and eventually toward Rome. The journey itself was long and uncertain. Roads were dangerous. Travel was slow. Illness, weather, and politics all posed risks. For a king, travel meant vulnerability. Every mile placed distance between Æthelwulf and his throne. Every night away increased the possibility that events at home might spiral beyond control. Yet he continued. Step by step, he moved away from the center of power he had spent nearly 2 decades stabilizing. This was not a retreat, it was resolve. As Æthelwulf traveled, his identity shifted. In Wessex, he was unquestioned authority. On the road, he was one traveler among many, granted respect but no longer absolute control. This change mattered. It reminded him, and those who accompanied him, that kingship was not permanent. That power was temporary. That legacy depended on choices, not titles. Pilgrimage stripped away illusion. It placed faith above force, humility above command. For Æthelwulf, this was not weakness. It was clarity. As Æthelwulf drew closer to Rome, the significance of his journey grew. Rome was not just a city. It was the spiritual center of Western Christendom. Recognition there carried weight far beyond borders. A king received in Rome was a king acknowledged by the wider Christian world. Æthelwulf understood this. His pilgrimage was becoming something more than devotion. It was a statement to allies, rivals, and history itself. Wessex was not isolated. Its king was not provincial. Its legitimacy reached across Europe. Soon, Æthelwulf would stand at the heart of Christian authority. And when he did, the consequences would echo back across the sea, to a kingdom waiting, watching, and wondering what kind of king would return. Rome did not announce itself quietly. For a traveler from 9th century Britain, the city felt overwhelming. Stone towers rose where wooden halls were familiar. Ancient roads stretched outward like arteries of power. Churches stood on layers of history older than any kingdom in England. When Æthelwulf arrived, he entered more than a place. He entered memory. Rome represented continuity, the idea that authority could outlast generations, wars, even empires. For a king ruling a fragile island kingdom, this mattered deeply. His presence here sent a message far beyond devotion. It said that Wessex belonged to the wider Christian world, that its king was recognized, received, and respected among rulers whose power reached across Europe. This was legitimacy no battlefield could provide. Æthelwulf's time in Rome was deliberate. He made gifts to churches. He supported religious foundations. He strengthened ties that connected spiritual authority to political legitimacy. In the medieval world, these gestures were not symbolic. they were strategic. A king recognized by the heart of Christendom gained moral authority at home. His rule appeared sanctioned not just by tradition, but by faith itself. This mattered in an age when belief shaped obedience. Æthelwulf was not expanding territory. He was expanding legitimacy. Time away changes perspective. Removed from daily pressures, Æthelwulf could see his reign more clearly. The fragility of power, the cost of constant vigilance, the limits of force. Rome offered distance, and distance brought reflection. He was no longer just defending Wessex. He was shaping its future identity. This journey affirmed something he had believed all along, that kingship was not only about command, but about stewardship. That survival could be deliberate, not dramatic, and that the quiet choices often mattered most. While Æthelwulf was in Rome, news traveled slowly. Messages crossed land and sea at uncertain speed. Events at home unfolded beyond his immediate control. This uncertainty was the price of trust. He had left Wessex in the hands of his sons, believing preparation would outweigh ambition, believing loyalty would hold. But belief does not erase risk. Every day away tested the strength of what he had built. This tension followed him, even here. Eventually, the pilgrimage ended. Æthelwulf prepared to return, not as a changed king, but as a confirmed one. His authority had not diminished. It had matured. He carried recognition that could not be taken by force, connections that reached beyond the island he ruled. And now he would bring them home. But returning is often harder than leaving. Power does not wait patiently. Expectations shift. Absence reshapes relationships. As Æthelwulf turned back toward Wessex, he did so knowing that the kingdom he left would not be exactly the one he returned to. The greatest test of his reign was still ahead. The journey back to Wessex was not a victory march. Æthelwulf returned quietly, without announcement, without ceremony. But beneath the calm surface, the kingdom had shifted. Power always changes when a king is absent. New loyalties form, old assumptions weaken. Authority becomes something negotiated rather than assumed. Æthelwulf sensed this immediately. The structures he left behind had held, but not without strain. His sons had ruled capably, but confidence had grown alongside responsibility. This was the cost of preparation. A kingdom strong enough to function without its king is also a kingdom capable of questioning him. Æthelwulf understood this risk before he ever left. Now he faced it directly. While Æthelwulf was gone, authority had become shared in practice, not just in theory. His eldest son had grown comfortable ruling. Nobles had adjusted to new leadership. Decision-making no longer flowed from a single source. This was not rebellion, but it was change. Æthelwulf did not respond with force. He did not punish. He did not attempt to reassert control through fear. Instead, he observed. He understood that undoing this shift violently would fracture the stability he had spent years protecting. So he chose restraint. And restraint, again, would be misunderstood. The most dangerous moment in a reign is not defeat. It is transition. Æthelwulf faced a situation that had destroyed many kings before him, a capable heir, a supportive nobility, a kingdom no longer dependent on one man. This could end in civil war. History offered countless examples, but Æthelwulf refused that path. He chose compromise over dominance. This decision would define him more than any battle ever could. Æthelwulf made a choice few kings would consider. He divided authority. Rather than reclaim absolute control, he formalized shared rule. Territories were allocated. Responsibilities clarified. This was not surrender. It was strategy. By acknowledging reality instead of resisting it, Æthelwulf avoided bloodshed. He preserved unity. He kept Wessex whole. The crown remained his, but the kingdom was protected from tearing itself apart. This act required confidence, not weakness. By the end of this crisis, Æthelwulf's reign had changed. He was no longer the unquestioned center of power. He was something rarer, a king who understood when not to rule alone. This choice ensured continuity. It allowed future kings to inherit stability rather than chaos. It created the conditions under which greatness, real greatness, could later emerge. History would not celebrate this moment, but Wessex survived because of it. And survival in the 9th century was victory. Æthelwulf returned not as a conqueror, but as a confirmed king, tested by absence and strengthened by recognition abroad. He had walked away from his kingdom voluntarily, entrusted it to others, and returned to find it intact. Few rulers could claim such an achievement. Yet his return brought subtle challenges. His sons had gained experience and influence. Nobles had grown accustomed to the shared authority. And while loyalty remained, the balance of power had shifted. Æthelwulf faced a delicate task: assert himself enough to maintain respect, without undermining the stability he had spent years cultivating. He did not rely on force. He relied on trust, preparation, and reputation. His authority no longer came solely from being king. It came from what he had done to make the kingdom resilient. This was a type of power few histories celebrate, because it is quiet, measured, and almost invisible. Yet in the 9th century, it was extraordinary. Æthelwulf's family remained central to the kingdom's stability. His eldest son, Æthelbald, now experienced in governance, had ruled effectively in his father's absence. The younger sons were no longer mere heirs. They had responsibility and influence. This created both opportunity and risk. Power divided can preserve peace, but it also invites rivalry. Many kings failed simply because they could not manage their own households. Æthelwulf's approach was unusual. He allowed authority to be shared while remaining the ultimate arbiter. Decisions were collaborative, but final judgment rested with him. This subtle management kept Wessex unified. It prevented rebellion before it could form. It maintained loyalty without overt coercion. Æthelwulf understood that a strong family was as crucial as a strong army. The bonds between father, sons, and nobles would determine whether Wessex thrived or fragmented. Even with authority shared, vigilance was essential. Vikings continued to raid. Their tactics were unpredictable, their ambitions growing. Wessex could not afford complacency. Æthelwulf strengthened defenses strategically. Fortifications along rivers and coasts were reinforced. Armies were maintained without excessive strain on resources. Nobles were expected to lead, but central oversight ensured coordination. He avoided unnecessary confrontation, choosing battles where victory was likely and retreat where it preserved strength. These were not dramatic victories, but calculated measures that ensured survival. Every decision reinforced the kingdom's resilience. Æthelwulf understood that survival in the 9th century required patience, foresight, and adaptability, qualities rarely immortalized in chronicles, but essential to history's continuity. By the mid-850s, Æthelwulf had ruled for nearly 2 decades. Time weighed differently on him now. Battles had been fought, stability achieved, and his sons prepared for leadership. The kingdom was stronger, safer, and more united than when he ascended the throne. Yet rulers never truly retire. Every day brought decisions that shaped life and death, peace and chaos. Æthelwulf remained active, attending councils, overseeing law and justice, and maintaining diplomatic ties with continental powers. Even in relative calm, he knew the fragility of success. One poorly timed raid, one dissatisfied noble, or one untimely death could undo decades of effort. History remembers the dramatic moments, the victories, the conquests, the deaths. Æthelwulf's strength lay elsewhere, in the quiet maintenance of order, the slow accumulation of stability, and the foresight to prepare the next generation. Æthelwulf's work was not designed for immediate fame. It was designed to endure. He understood that history favors heroes who fight boldly, but survival favors those who plan wisely. Every alliance forged, every son trained, every fortification strengthened. These were the invisible victories that would shape Wessex long after his death. Even as he aged, he continued to balance diplomacy, faith, and military readiness. He reinforced the kingdom's Christian ties, securing support from continental powers, while keeping the loyalty of his nobles grounded in local governance. This dual approach, attention to both local and international authority, was rare. Most rulers relied on either force or faith, never both. Æthelwulf blended them with precision, ensuring that his kingdom would survive upheaval and prepare the way for a son who would become legendary. The quiet decisions of these years would ripple far into the future, yet they remained largely unnoticed by chroniclers focused on dramatic battles. Æthelwulf's legacy was subtle, almost invisible, but it was effective. Even in his final years, Æthelwulf understood that power extended beyond Wessex's borders. He maintained relationships with continental rulers, especially the Frankish kings and the papacy. These ties were not mere ceremony. They provided legitimacy, security, and potential support in times of crisis. Æthelwulf's diplomacy was subtle. He offered gifts, reinforced religious alliances, and strengthened cultural connections between Wessex and Europe. Each act was designed to bolster the kingdom's reputation and to remind rivals that Wessex was not isolated. Unlike many kings who relied solely on military force, Æthelwulf wielded influence through respect and recognition. He knew that authority validated abroad reinforced obedience at home. Through these quiet diplomatic efforts, he secured Wessex's place on the wider European stage, ensuring that when he passed, the kingdom would inherit not just stability, but recognition. Succession was always the shadow looming over a king's reign. Æthelwulf worked diligently to secure his sons' positions. He gave them authority in governance and military matters, training them in both leadership and diplomacy. Each son was expected to understand the delicate balance between power and stability. Unlike rulers who centralized authority, Æthelwulf deliberately prepared the next generation to govern collectively if needed. This reduced the risk of internal rebellion, a common downfall for Anglo-Saxon kings. By structuring succession in this way, he created resilience. Even if a son failed, the kingdom as a whole remained intact. Loyalty, respect, and recognition would endure beyond a single lifetime. His foresight ensured that Wessex would survive, not because of one king, but because of the systems he created. Religion remained central to Æthelwulf's strategy. Churches and monasteries were more than spiritual centers. They were hubs of administration, literacy, and influence. Supporting them strengthened Wessex's internal cohesion and projected authority abroad. Æthelwulf personally maintained close ties with bishops and clergy, ensuring that moral and spiritual authority reinforced his secular rule. Religious observances were carefully timed, and pilgrimages, like his journey to Rome, demonstrated piety while signaling legitimacy. Faith in Æthelwulf's hands became a tool of governance. It united a kingdom that could easily fracture and provided a moral framework that justified his decisions, even unconventional ones. Through this integration of faith and politics, Æthelwulf ensured that Wessex was resilient not just militarily, but socially and culturally. Æthelwulf's reign is unusual in history because his greatest victories were invisible. He avoided dramatic battles that would make chroniclers swoon. He sidestepped catastrophic failures that would make rulers infamous. Instead, he maintained continuity, trained heirs, reinforced alliances, and preserved life in a violent era. This kind of achievement is rarely celebrated, but it is essential. For kingdoms in the 9th century, survival often mattered more than glory. Æthelwulf's careful management, combining diplomacy, faith, and strategic delegation, ensured that Wessex would outlast threats that toppled less prepared kingdoms. History often overlooks rulers like him. Yet without Æthelwulf, the achievements of Alfred the Great and later Wessex leaders may never have been possible. He demonstrated that quiet, deliberate action can change the course of history as profoundly as conquest. As Æthelwulf entered the final years of his reign, he maintained vigilance but accepted the limits of control. He knew that time, like the sea, was beyond human command. He continued to guide his sons, consult with nobles, and uphold alliances, but he also recognized that some forces could not be directed. This perspective shaped his leadership style. Instead of overreaching, he focused on strengthening what already worked. He preserved structures, reinforced relationships, and prepared Wessex to endure beyond his lifetime. Æthelwulf's final years were marked by reflection as much as action. He saw the kingdom as a living entity, dependent on continuity, faith, and foresight. He understood that history rarely praises caution, yet without it, kingdoms vanish. In these years, his legacy solidified, not through battles, but through the survival of Wessex, the preparedness of his heirs, and the reinforcement of alliances that would shape England's future. By the mid-850s, Æthelwulf had ruled Wessex for nearly 2 decades. Age brought perspective as much as fatigue. He no longer approached governance with the urgency of a young king confronting immediate threats. Instead, he relied on experience, foresight, and the systems he had meticulously built. Every decision reflected decades of trial and observation. The kingdom's defenses were organized. His sons were seasoned leaders. Nobles understood the balance between autonomy and loyalty. Yet with age came the awareness of mortality. Æthelwulf understood that the time remaining to safeguard his legacy was finite. Every action now carried additional weight, because mistakes would have no opportunity for correction. In a world where sudden death was common, his careful planning was the difference between survival and collapse. Threats never fully disappeared, even in a stable kingdom. The Vikings continued to raid coastal settlements. Their presence was a constant reminder that security was fragile. Æthelwulf balanced vigilance with restraint, responding when necessary but avoiding unnecessary conflict that could drain resources. Internally, tension between sons and nobles required careful management. Power shared inevitably shifts perception and ambition. Æthelwulf navigated these dynamics with subtle authority, ensuring disputes did not escalate into rebellion. Every alliance, every land grant, every council meeting was an exercise in prevention. He knew that even minor disruptions could spiral into chaos if ignored. By balancing military readiness, diplomatic relationships, and internal governance, Æthelwulf maintained a kingdom that appeared calm externally, but was carefully orchestrated internally. In his final years, Æthelwulf focused on reforms rather than expansion. He codified local laws, reinforced taxation systems to fund defense, and strengthened ties between nobles and clergy. Each reform was designed not for fame, but for continuity. These changes were practical and forward-looking. They ensured that Wessex would remain resilient regardless of who held the throne after him. Æthelwulf also emphasized education and preparation for his sons. Instruction in governance, military strategy, and diplomacy became central to their upbringing. He understood that survival required more than inherited power. It demanded competence, judgment, and credibility. Every action reflected a long-term perspective, rare in an era that often rewarded short-term victories. Even within Wessex, Æthelwulf maintained a spiritual dimension to his rule. He visited monasteries, attended religious ceremonies, and supported the church financially. These acts reinforced both faith and authority, reminding the population that the king's legitimacy was grounded in divine as well as secular power. Pilgrimages abroad had already strengthened his international standing. Now, his presence at home reaffirmed his moral and political authority locally. This integration of faith and governance ensured loyalty among nobles and clergy, while also promoting social cohesion among common people. In an age where both external raids and internal disputes threatened kingdoms, this quiet spiritual leadership was a crucial pillar of stability. By 855, Æthelwulf's reign approached its natural conclusion. He had survived external threats, guided his sons into leadership, and preserved Wessex from collapse. Few rulers of the 9th century could claim such a record, yet his legacy would often be overshadowed by the fame of those who followed, particularly his son Alfred. His final days were marked by reflection rather than urgency. He observed the kingdom he had shaped, its fortified towns, loyal nobles, and prepared heirs. He understood that the survival of Wessex was his true achievement. Death would not erase his influence. The systems he built, the alliances he forged, and the heirs he trained ensured that Wessex would continue to thrive. Æthelwulf's reign demonstrates a profound truth about leadership. Impact is not measured only in victories or conquests, but in preservation, foresight, and resilience. He was a king whose subtle, deliberate choices allowed a fragile kingdom to endure in an age of upheaval. Æthelwulf's final days were quiet, reflective, and purposeful. He remained at his estates, overseeing the kingdom's governance and ensuring the succession plans he had carefully crafted were firmly in place. His sons, now fully experienced, assumed more responsibility, but Æthelwulf remained the anchor of authority. He visited churches, offered prayers, and reaffirmed alliances with both nobles and clergy. Even as his strength waned, he understood that presence, even limited, reinforced stability. Unlike kings who die in battle or are overthrown, Æthelwulf faced mortality with preparation rather than panic. He had engineered continuity, not chaos. His reign was approaching its natural conclusion, not an abrupt end. In an era of violence and upheaval, such foresight was rare. By the time he passed, the kingdom he ruled remained intact, prepared, and resilient. Even as Æthelwulf's health declined, the kingdom of Wessex stood firm. Nobles continued to govern effectively under the delegated structure he had established. Fortifications along coasts and rivers remained maintained. Soldiers and militias were alert but not overextended. Trade continued, and religious institutions flourished under continued support. This stability was not accidental. It was the direct result of a reign that valued foresight and subtle authority over spectacle. Æthelwulf had preserved not just the crown, but the very infrastructure of governance. ensuring that Wessex would survive both internal tension and external threats. In many ways, the kingdom's quiet endurance was his most enduring victory. It was the invisible framework upon which future leaders would build. Æthelwulf took deliberate steps to ensure the transition of power would be smooth. He formally acknowledged his eldest son, Æthelbald, as the primary ruler in practice, while maintaining oversight and guidance. Other sons were given defined roles, with responsibilities clearly outlined to avoid disputes. He consulted with nobles and clergy to confirm their support for the succession plan. Each decision was a reinforcement of stability. By leaving no ambiguity, Æthelwulf minimized the risk of rebellion or fragmentation. Even in his final days, he exemplified leadership through preparation. He did not rely on charisma or fear. He relied on careful planning, foresight, and the loyalty he had cultivated over decades. This method of transition was extraordinary for the period, when kingdoms often fractured upon a ruler's death. Æthelwulf ensured that Wessex would survive beyond him, not by conquest, but through structure and trust. Æthelwulf died in 858, after a reign of nearly 20 years. His death was not sudden or violent. It was the natural conclusion of a lifetime spent balancing power, faith, and strategy. The kingdom he had ruled was intact, secure, and prepared for succession. There was no dramatic battle or betrayal. No uprising marked his passing. Instead, Wessex continued under the guidance of his eldest son, Æthelbald, and the systems Æthelwulf had carefully reinforced. In the chaos of 9th-century England, this was remarkable. Most kings perished, leaving instability, civil strife, or conquest behind them. Æthelwulf left continuity, survival, resilience. Though history would often focus on his more famous son, Alfred, the foundation laid by Æthelwulf made that later success possible. His subtle achievements, delegating power, strengthening ties, integrating faith, and preparing heirs, were the invisible threads that held Wessex together. Æthelwulf's legacy is subtle, almost invisible to the casual observer, but profound. He was a king who avoided unnecessary conflict, yet defended his kingdom effectively. He shared power, yet remained the ultimate authority. He leveraged faith and diplomacy, not just military force, to maintain stability. His reign demonstrates that history does not only celebrate flamboyant victories or dramatic conquests. Often, the most impactful leadership is quiet, methodical, and forward-thinking. Because of Æthelwulf, Wessex survived a volatile era. Because of him, his sons, and eventually Alfred the Great, had the opportunity to elevate the kingdom to legendary status. His influence was structural rather than sensational, woven into the very fabric of Wessex. The visible glories of his successors were built on the invisible foundations he carefully established. Æthelwulf reminds us that survival, foresight, and prudent leadership can be more transformative than any single battle. In a time of upheaval, he preserved life, order, and the possibility of greatness. Æthelwulf's death marked the beginning of a new chapter for Wessex. Power transferred smoothly to Æthelbald, thanks to careful planning. Nobles, clergy, and regional leaders recognized the continuity of authority. There was no chaos, no disputes over succession. The kingdom endured, prepared, and resilient. This transition was unusual in the volatile 9th century. Many kingdoms collapsed or fractured when a ruler died. Wessex remained unified because Æthelwulf had invested decades in foresight, structure, and trust. His influence persisted even after death. The lessons he instilled in his sons, strategic delegation, integration of faith and governance, and careful diplomacy, shaped decisions long after his reign ended. Survival, more than conquest, was the hallmark of Æthelwulf's legacy. The kingdom he preserved would serve as the foundation for the triumphs of his successors, including Alfred, whose legendary status owed much to the groundwork laid by his father. Æthelwulf's reign demonstrates that true power is often invisible. He rarely sought glory or fame. He did not pursue grand conquests. His victories were subtle, strengthening defenses, maintaining loyalty, preparing heirs, and integrating religion and governance. These achievements may seem unremarkable in chronicles obsessed with battles and heroic deaths, yet they were transformative. Wessex survived external threats that had destroyed less prepared kingdoms. Civil unrest was avoided because he had shared power prudently. His sons were trained, ready to rule. The strength of his kingdom lay not in spectacular acts, but in continuous, careful management. It was resilience crafted over decades, and it endured beyond his life. Æthelwulf's story reminds us that survival itself is an achievement, and that quiet, deliberate leadership can shape history in ways that dramatic victories cannot. One of Æthelwulf's most enduring contributions was the preparation of his sons. His careful mentoring ensured that the kingdom would not falter under their rule. This preparation directly enabled Alfred, later Alfred the Great, to inherit a kingdom that was stable, unified, and militarily capable. Without Æthelwulf's foresight, his strategic delegation, integration of religion and diplomacy, and emphasis on continuity, Alfred's eventual reforms and victories might have been impossible. In a sense, Æthelwulf's greatest victories were invisible: the survival of Wessex, the competence of his heirs, and the stability of the kingdom itself. These foundations allowed future triumphs, demonstrating that a ruler's legacy is often measured not in immediate fame, but in the enduring strength of what he leaves behind. History often overlooks rulers like Æthelwulf. Chroniclers preferred dramatic battles, heroic deaths, and conquest. Æthelwulf, by contrast, ruled quietly, prioritizing survival, preparation, and stability over spectacle. Yet his influence was profound. Wessex endured in a period when other kingdoms fell. His sons ruled with competence. Alliances endured. Faith and governance were integrated, reinforcing authority and social cohesion. This quiet achievement set the stage for future generations. Æthelwulf's reign reminds us that leadership is not always loud or immediate. The choices that preserve life, strengthen institutions, and prepare successors can have consequences far greater than any single battle. Recognition may come later, often posthumously. Æthelwulf's name may not inspire songs or legends, but the kingdom he preserved became the bedrock for England's eventual consolidation and survival. Æthelwulf's reign teaches a lesson often ignored by history: that survival, preparation, and foresight are as important as conquest. He ruled in an era of unpredictability, raids, political instability, and fragile kingdoms. Yet through delegation, diplomacy, integration of faith, and careful planning, he preserved Wessex when many others would have failed. His approach required patience, restraint, and wisdom. Decisions were calculated, sometimes invisible, but always deliberate. He understood that a king's strength is not just in winning battles, but in leaving a kingdom capable of enduring beyond his lifetime. Æthelwulf's quiet power laid the foundation for Alfred the Great and the eventual unification of England. The stability he created allowed future leaders to build, expand, and reform without fearing immediate collapse. In the end, Æthelwulf's reign demonstrates that legacy is not measured by fame or spectacle, but by the enduring structures, loyal followers, and prepared heirs a ruler leaves behind. His story is a reminder that true leadership is often subtle, invisible, and profoundly transformative. Æthelwulf's passing did not plunge Wessex into chaos. Thanks to his careful planning, the kingdom transitioned smoothly to his son's leadership. Æthelbald assumed authority, while younger sons maintained responsibility over regions and military forces. Nobles and clergy recognized the continuity of rule, and the systems Æthelwulf had built ensured cooperation rather than conflict. Externally, Wessex continued to face Viking raids and the shifting politics of neighboring kingdoms. But Æthelwulf had fortified both the physical and social defenses of his realm. Fortified towns, trained armies, loyal nobles, and integrated religious authority all contributed to the kingdom's resilience. This stability allowed Wessex to survive a turbulent era in a way few contemporary kingdoms managed. Æthelwulf's absence, though permanent, did not create a vacuum, because he had engineered the kingdom to function without dependence on a single man. Æthelwulf's greatest achievement may have been continuity itself. By sharing authority wisely, mentoring his sons, and integrating religion into governance, he created a kingdom that could endure instability. Power was not centralized in a way that made the throne fragile. It was distributed thoughtfully, with safeguards against internal fracture. This kind of leadership is rare in medieval history, where the death of a ruler often precipitated civil war. Æthelwulf's foresight prevented such a fate, allowing Wessex to remain united and capable of responding to threats. The structures he built, both administrative and familial, became the foundation for his son's reigns. These systems ensured that Wessex did not merely survive, but was positioned to thrive in the coming decades. Æthelwulf's legacy directly influenced the rise of Alfred the Great. By maintaining stability, preparing heirs, and strengthening the kingdom's institutions, he left Alfred a Wessex capable of extraordinary achievement. When Alfred eventually faced the Vikings, the kingdom's resilience, military, political, and social, was already in place. Æthelwulf's quiet victories created the environment in which legendary feats could occur. Alfred did not inherit a fragile or fractured realm. He inherited a kingdom carefully maintained, loyal, and disciplined. The connection between Æthelwulf's decisions and Alfred's later success demonstrates the long-term impact of foresight. While Æthelwulf himself may not appear prominently in chronicles, his work enabled the survival and expansion of a kingdom that would shape England's history. Æthelwulf's reign is often overshadowed by his more famous son, Alfred, yet his story offers lessons in subtlety, patience, and long-term planning. Unlike kings who sought glory through battle or conquest, Æthelwulf focused on preserving life, maintaining stability, and preparing the next generation. His victories were invisible, yet essential. The kingdom survived external threats, civil unrest was avoided, and his heirs were capable leaders. Wessex endured because of choices that might seem mundane: delegation, preparation, diplomacy, and the integration of religious authority into governance. These invisible victories reveal that effective leadership is not always dramatic. Sometimes, the quiet work of sustaining a kingdom matters more than conquest or fame. Æthelwulf's reign teaches enduring lessons about leadership and legacy. Power is more than force. It is trust, preparation, and the ability to shape institutions that survive beyond one lifetime. Æthelwulf exemplified this principle. He delegated wisely, strengthened faith-based authority, and prepared heirs to lead effectively. His reign demonstrates that survival in a volatile era requires foresight, restraint, and strategic patience. While dramatic battles and heroic deeds often dominate history books, it is careful, invisible work that ensures continuity and long-term success. Æthelwulf's choices allowed Wessex not only to endure, but to provide the foundation for Alfred's legendary achievements. His subtle leadership ensured that the kingdom survived Viking threats, avoided internal strife, and remained a unified political entity. In this sense, Æthelwulf's legacy is profound. He reminds us that true power is measured not by immediate fame or spectacular victories, but by the enduring strength and resilience of the systems, people, and institutions one leaves behind. Even after Æthelwulf's death, Wessex faced a relentless threat from Viking raiders. Coastal towns and monasteries remained vulnerable, reminding the new generation of rulers that survival was not guaranteed. However, thanks to Æthelwulf's defensive policies, the kingdom was better prepared than most. Fortified towns, early warning systems, and trained militias provided a buffer against sudden attacks. The careful division of authority meant that local leaders could respond quickly without waiting for central approval. Communication between nobles, clergy, and military commanders was faster and more effective than in kingdoms led by a single ruler without prepared systems. This groundwork allowed Æthelbald and later sons to focus on strategy rather than crisis management. Wessex endured raids that might have toppled less prepared kingdoms. Æthelwulf's subtle work, preparing the kingdom for continuity, demonstrated the enduring value of invisible leadership. His decisions extended beyond his life, ensuring that Wessex could withstand the chaos of the 9th century. Æthelwulf's lasting impact was not just military, it was institutional. He strengthened the administration of Wessex, ensuring tax collection, law enforcement, and land management were reliable. Clergy played a role in governance, recording events, mediating disputes, and reinforcing authority. These institutions formed a stable backbone for the kingdom. By codifying responsibilities and delegating effectively, Æthelwulf reduced the risk of civil unrest. Nobles knew their roles, and succession plans were clear. Leadership became a system rather than a personality-driven rule. This institutional stability was crucial. While other kingdoms crumbled under the pressures of succession or raids, Wessex remained coherent and prepared. Æthelwulf's invisible structures allowed his sons to inherit not just land, but governance that worked. Faith remained a cornerstone of Æthelwulf's legacy. Churches and monasteries were more than spiritual centers. They were hubs of learning, record-keeping, and local administration. By supporting these institutions, Æthelwulf reinforced both religious and political authority. Clergy loyalty helped stabilize the kingdom. They legitimized rulership, advised on governance, and mediated conflicts among nobles. Monasteries provided refuge and resources during crises. Pilgrimages, including Æthelwulf's famous journey to Rome, strengthened ties with the broader Christian world, enhancing legitimacy and influence. This integration of faith and politics was sophisticated for the time. Æthelwulf understood that moral authority reinforced secular power. His successors inherited not only a kingdom of fortified towns and loyal subjects, but also an institutionally and spiritually reinforced society, capable of withstanding external threats and internal disputes. Æthelwulf's greatest investment was in his sons. He trained them not only in warfare, but in governance, diplomacy, and religion. They learned to navigate the delicate balance of power between nobles, clergy, and commoners. They understood that leadership was about decisions that preserved life, loyalty, and order. This preparation ensured that the next generation of Wessex rulers could respond to crises with competence, rather than relying solely on personal authority. It was a rare and strategic foresight in an era when kingdoms often collapsed after the death of a ruler. Through education, delegation, and careful mentoring, Æthelwulf turned his sons into capable leaders while keeping the kingdom unified. The foundation he laid would directly contribute to Alfred the Great's legendary reign, demonstrating how preparation and foresight can outlast immediate fame or battlefield glory. Looking back, Æthelwulf's reign illustrates a profound principle. Leadership is not always measured by spectacle, but by endurance. He ruled in a turbulent era, yet his kingdom survived. He shared power without weakening authority. He integrated faith with governance. He prepared heirs without creating conflict. He faced external threats without succumbing to panic. While history often highlights battles, heroic deaths, and flamboyant rulers, Æthelwulf's influence was subtle but transformative. His decisions created resilience, an invisible but unbreakable framework that allowed Wessex to thrive long after his death. The kingdom he preserved became the stage for Alfred the Great and the eventual consolidation of England. Æthelwulf's careful planning, quiet diplomacy, and steadfast commitment to continuity ensured that the chaos of the 9th century did not destroy his legacy. His story is a reminder that survival, preparation, and foresight are as important as conquest. That true leadership often works quietly, in the background, building systems, guiding successors, and creating stability that will outlast any single ruler. By the early 850s, Wessex had transformed from a fragile kingdom into a resilient state. Æthelwulf's policies, careful delegation, defensive fortifications, integrated faith, and preparation of heirs, had created a kingdom capable of enduring both internal disputes and external threats. The groundwork for survival was firmly in place. Fortified towns along coasts and rivers, loyal nobles, and a prepared military meant that Viking raids, while threatening, could be met with organized resistance. Administrative systems ensured continuity, even during crises. Clergy provided moral authority, education, and social cohesion. What sets Æthelwulf apart from many contemporary rulers is the deliberate, invisible work he invested in stability. Unlike kings remembered for victories on the battlefield, Æthelwulf won without fighting by ensuring the kingdom's structures could withstand pressure. His influence extended far beyond his life, preparing Wessex for the challenges that lay ahead, including the legendary reign of Alfred the Great. Æthelwulf understood that preparation was more powerful than reaction. Every decision, from military organization to succession planning, was forward-looking. By training his sons, he reduced the likelihood of rebellion or incompetence after his death. By integrating religious authority, he created legitimacy that extended beyond fear or force. By fortifying settlements, he made the kingdom resilient to attack. These invisible measures required patience, insight, and restraint. Æthelwulf avoided impulsive glory-seeking, recognizing that survival in the 9th century depended on foresight. He preserved lives, maintained loyalty, and built institutions capable of enduring crises. This emphasis on preparation created a kingdom that could act strategically, not merely respond to threats. Wessex became a state capable of long-term planning, a rarity in a century defined by sudden raids and fragile rule. Æthelwulf's style of leadership was subtle, almost invisible to contemporary chroniclers. He rarely sought heroic battles or public spectacle. Instead, his influence was exercised through mentorship, strategic planning, delegation, and diplomacy. These actions were less dramatic, but more enduring. He delegated authority to his sons without weakening the crown, ensuring that succession would be smooth. He integrated religion into governance to reinforce legitimacy and moral authority. He strengthened defenses and administrative systems to make the kingdom resilient. These invisible victories defined Æthelwulf's legacy. They preserved Wessex in an era when many kingdoms crumbled under external and internal pressures. By focusing on foresight and continuity, he laid the foundation for Alfred the Great's future successes. In this sense, Æthelwulf exemplifies a form of leadership that history often overlooks: the quiet, deliberate work that secures survival and enables greatness for future generations. Æthelwulf's reign demonstrates that true power is often the ability to preserve, rather than to conquer. Wessex survived because he balanced authority with delegation, strength with restraint, and governance with faith. Nobles knew their roles. The military was prepared. Clergy supported both religious and political authority. The kingdom functioned efficiently and cohesively. This stability allowed Wessex to withstand pressures that would have destroyed other kingdoms. It ensured that his sons inherited a kingdom that was not fragile, but resilient. While battles and conquests often define historical memory, Æthelwulf's quiet achievements ensured that the kingdom endured long after his death. His legacy was structural, institutional, and generational, less dramatic than a victory in war, but far more lasting. By the time Æthelwulf passed, Wessex was prepared for the challenges of the next generation. His sons, trained in leadership, governance, and diplomacy, were ready to assume authority. Administrative systems ensured that the kingdom could function without constant oversight. Fortifications and militias protected the realm. Religious institutions reinforced social cohesion and legitimacy. Æthelwulf's foresight created a platform for future success. Alfred the Great would later inherit a kingdom capable of resisting Viking invasions and evolving into the foundation of a unified England. But Alfred's triumphs were possible only because Æthelwulf had quietly preserved, strengthened, and prepared the kingdom decades earlier. Æthelwulf's reign reminds us that leadership is not only about glory or conquest. It is also about preparation, stability, and enduring impact. By creating a resilient kingdom, he shaped history in subtle but profound ways. In this sense, the quiet king achieved what few rulers could: a lasting legacy built not on spectacle, but on foresight, discipline, and careful stewardship of power. Æthelwulf's reign challenges the traditional view of kingship in the 9th century. He was not a king remembered for battlefield glory or dramatic conquest. Instead, he ruled through preparation, foresight, and careful management. His strength lay in stability, not spectacle. By delegating authority to his sons, integrating religious and secular governance, and reinforcing defensive structures, he created a kingdom that could endure without relying solely on the personal presence of its ruler. This approach required discipline, patience, and humility, qualities rarely celebrated in medieval chronicles. Æthelwulf's success was invisible to many contemporaries, yet it allowed Wessex to thrive in a time of relentless external pressure and potential internal conflict. In the end, Æthelwulf's achievements were long-lasting. He secured not only the kingdom's survival, but the foundation for future prosperity. His reign demonstrates that true leadership is often measured by endurance and foresight, not by the immediate drama of war. In a century dominated by Viking raids and political instability, survival was the ultimate measure of success. Æthelwulf understood this better than most. He focused on strengthening the kingdom's core rather than seeking fleeting victories. Fortified towns, organized militias, loyal nobles, and an integrated religious network created a resilient framework. This invisible strategy allowed Wessex to endure where other kingdoms fell. By prioritizing long-term survival over short-term glory, Æthelwulf ensured that his heirs could inherit a functional, unified realm. Even his son's later achievements, including Alfred's legendary victories, were made possible by this foundational work. Æthelwulf's quiet victories, administrative, defensive, and diplomatic, set the stage for Wessex's emergence as a dominant force in England. Æthelwulf's use of faith was strategic as well as personal. Religious institutions reinforced authority, mediated disputes, and maintained social cohesion. Monasteries preserved knowledge, recorded events, and served as centers of administration. Æthelwulf personally maintained ties with bishops and clergy, integrating spiritual legitimacy into political governance. Pilgrimages, including his journey to Rome, strengthened ties with continental rulers and the papacy, adding recognition and influence beyond Wessex. This blending of faith and politics was subtle but powerful. Religious authority reinforced loyalty, helped prevent internal disputes, and provided moral justification for governance decisions. By embedding spiritual influence within the administrative framework of the kingdom, Æthelwulf created a dual foundation, secular and spiritual, that made Wessex more resilient than kingdoms that relied solely on military power or dynastic authority. Æthelwulf's foresight extended directly to his children. He trained his sons in leadership, military strategy, and diplomacy. They observed governance, participated in councils, and learned to balance authority with restraint. This preparation ensured that, when the time came, Wessex would not depend on a single ruler's charisma or strength. The kingdom's continuity rested on competence and loyalty, not chance. By cultivating capable heirs, Æthelwulf guaranteed that his vision for Wessex would endure. Alfred and his siblings inherited a kingdom equipped to withstand Viking pressures and internal challenges. This approach illustrates a rare principle in medieval kingship. Leadership is measured not only by conquest, but by the ability to prepare others to maintain and strengthen the realm. As we reflect on Æthelwulf's reign, it becomes clear that his impact extends far beyond his lifetime. He ruled in an era of uncertainty, yet his kingdom endured. His legacy was not flashy or immediately dramatic, but structural, generational, and enduring. Fortified towns, loyal nobles, prepared heirs, and integrated religious authority created a Wessex capable of surviving Viking raids, internal disputes, and the unpredictable forces of the 9th century. Æthelwulf's foresight allowed Alfred the Great to inherit a kingdom ready for reform, expansion, and defense. Without his father's preparation, Alfred's achievements might never have been possible. The story of Æthelwulf teaches us that true leadership is often subtle. It is measured not by immediate spectacle, but by foresight, preparation, and the ability to build systems that endure. His quiet victories ensured survival, unity, and the foundation for future greatness. In studying Æthelwulf, we gain insight into the power of restraint, the importance of mentorship, and the enduring influence of careful planning in shaping history. With Æthelwulf's passing, Wessex entered a period of transition, but one firmly anchored by his prior planning. Æthelbald assumed primary leadership, and his brothers, Æthelbert, Æthelred, and Alfred, took on roles suited to their abilities. The kingdom's systems, from local administration to military organization, ensured continuity. Nobles and clergy recognized the legitimacy of the succession, and towns remained defended. This seamless transition contrasts sharply with other kingdoms of the 9th century, many of which collapsed when rulers died. Æthelwulf's foresight turned succession from a potential crisis into a manageable, organized process. Even as Viking raids persisted, the kingdom remained resilient. Local leaders could respond quickly, armies were coordinated, and monasteries provided both spiritual guidance and practical support. The survival and stability of Wessex during this period are a direct result of Æthelwulf's invisible leadership. The careful preparation, delegation, and mentoring that allowed the kingdom to endure without his presence. Æthelwulf's enduring influence is evident in the institutions he strengthened. He codified administrative practices, reinforced taxation, and ensured the enforcement of laws across Wessex. Clergy were integrated into governance, mediating disputes, preserving knowledge, and reinforcing authority. Monasteries became centers of both education and local administration, providing stability in times of crisis. By building these systems, Æthelwulf created a kingdom that could function efficiently even without his direct oversight. Nobles understood their roles, military responsibilities were clear, and social cohesion was reinforced by faith and law. These institutional structures were subtle, invisible to many historians, yet they were vital to Wessex's survival. The kingdom's endurance in the face of Viking raids and political instability illustrates the importance of these foundations. External pressures continued to define the challenges of 9th century Wessex. Viking raiders struck towns, monasteries, and coastal settlements with alarming frequency. Yet Wessex endured. Fortified towns, early warning systems, and trained militias allowed the kingdom to absorb attacks rather than collapse. Æthelwulf's defensive strategies, including fortifications and organized local responses, paid dividends long after his death. Leadership was distributed. Nobles and regional commanders had authority to act swiftly. Communication between centers of power ensured coordinated responses. This resilience highlights the genius of Æthelwulf's invisible victories. While he did not achieve fame through dramatic conquest, he created a kingdom capable of withstanding prolonged external pressure. The legacy of these strategies was visible in Alfred's later campaigns, when the kingdom's infrastructure and disciplined governance allowed it to survive and eventually repel Viking forces. Religious institutions played a pivotal role in Wessex's endurance. Æthelwulf maintained strong relationships with bishops, abbots, and monasteries. These ties reinforced both moral and political authority. Clergy mediated disputes, advised rulers, and helped maintain loyalty among the nobility. Monasteries were also centers of learning, producing manuscripts, recording events, and training future administrators. Pilgrimages and alliances with continental religious authorities added prestige to Wessex, reinforcing legitimacy beyond its borders. By integrating faith into governance, Æthelwulf created a kingdom that was spiritually and politically cohesive. This integration allowed Wessex to face crises with a unified front. Religious authority supported secular governance, and the moral weight of the church reinforced obedience and social cohesion. Faith was more than personal piety. It was a tool of statecraft, helping Æthelwulf preserve his kingdom and prepare his heirs for effective leadership. Perhaps Æthelwulf's most enduring achievement was the preparation of the next generation. His sons were trained in governance, diplomacy, and military strategy. They observed councils, studied maps and documents, and learned to balance power with prudence. This careful mentoring ensured that Wessex could continue functioning effectively after his death. The lessons Æthelwulf instilled, strategic delegation, integration of faith, emphasis on stability, were critical for Alfred and his siblings. Without this preparation, the kingdom might have fractured under Viking pressure or internal disputes. Æthelwulf's quiet, deliberate leadership created continuity, resilience, and competence. He demonstrates that effective rulership is not always measured by victories in battle, but by the enduring capacity of a kingdom to survive and thrive. In essence, Æthelwulf's legacy is invisible yet profound. It is found in the institutions he strengthened, the heirs he prepared, the fortifications he built, and the social cohesion he nurtured. His reign reminds us that true leadership is often subtle, forward-looking, and generational in its impact. Æthelwulf's reign stands as a model of stability in a turbulent era. Rather than seeking fame on the battlefield, he focused on the slow, careful work of fortifying a kingdom against chaos. Fortifications were reinforced, local leaders were empowered, and administration was codified. Every action reflected foresight, ensuring that Wessex would endure beyond his lifetime. Even subtle choices, granting land strategically, mentoring his sons, or supporting monasteries, were part of a deliberate strategy to secure continuity. While contemporary chroniclers often overlooked such quiet victories, the survival and later success of Wessex demonstrate their profound significance. Æthelwulf's approach shows that enduring leadership is often invisible. A kingdom is preserved not only through combat, but through preparation, foresight, and the careful cultivation of loyalty and competence. Despite Æthelwulf's death, Viking raids continued to threaten England's coasts. Wessex, however, was prepared. Fortified towns, alert militias, and coordinated regional leadership allowed the kingdom to respond effectively. Nobles had authority to act swiftly, and communication systems ensured that local and central leaders could coordinate defenses. This resilience was a direct outcome of Æthelwulf's policies. By creating a distributed system of governance and defense, he ensured that the kingdom could withstand prolonged external pressures. Survival against Viking threats was as much a testament to planning as it was to combat skill. Æthelwulf's invisible victories, preparation, mentorship, and institution building enabled Wessex to endure attacks that might have destroyed less prepared kingdoms. Faith was central to Æthelwulf's strategy. Monasteries and churches were not just spiritual centers, they were administrative hubs, record keepers, and educators. Clergy mediated disputes, advised rulers, and reinforced the moral authority of the crown. Æthelwulf cultivated strong relationships with bishops and abbots, integrating religious legitimacy into governance. Pilgrimages, including his journey to Rome, strengthened ties with continental rulers and the papacy, providing recognition and influence beyond Wessex. This combination of faith and statecraft created cohesion. Religious authority reinforced secular power, loyalty was strengthened, and the kingdom was more resistant to internal disruption. By embedding moral authority into governance, Æthelwulf created structures that supported Wessex through crisis and succession alike. Æthelwulf's foresight extended to his sons, whose training ensured Wessex's continuity. He taught governance, military strategy, and diplomacy, allowing them to observe councils, study maps, and understand the delicate balance of power. This preparation reduced the risk of internal disputes and succession crises, which had toppled many contemporary kingdoms. Alfred and his siblings inherited not just land, but competence, authority, and a kingdom structured to endure external threats. The stability Æthelwulf created allowed them to respond effectively when Viking pressure intensified later in the century. Through mentorship, careful delegation, and integration of institutions, Æthelwulf ensured that the kingdom he ruled would survive him intact, illustrating the transformative power of preparation over immediate fame or battlefield glory. Looking back, Æthelwulf's reign demonstrates the power of foresight and structural leadership. By emphasizing preparation, delegation, and institution building, he ensured that Wessex could survive turbulence and external threats. His invisible victories, fortified towns, loyal nobles, integrated religious authority, and trained heirs, provided the foundation for the kingdom's endurance. The stability he created directly enabled Alfred the Great's later reforms, military victories, and cultural influence. While Æthelwulf himself may not appear prominently in popular chronicles, his subtle, deliberate actions shaped the trajectory of English history. His story teaches that leadership is not only measured in spectacular conquests, but in the ability to preserve life, foster continuity, and prepare the next generation. In an era of instability, Æthelwulf exemplifies a ruler whose impact endured far beyond his lifetime, not through fame, but through structure, foresight, and careful stewardship of power. Wessex's survival, and the eventual consolidation of England, owes much to the quiet genius of this 9th-century king. Æthelwulf's reign reminds us that sometimes the most transformative victories are invisible, yet profoundly enduring. Even decades after his death, Æthelwulf's influence remained embedded in Wessex. His systems of governance, defensive structures, and mentorship of heirs created continuity that allowed the kingdom to function efficiently under new rulers. While his name may not appear in epic tales of heroism, his decisions enabled Alfred the Great and his siblings to inherit a stable and resilient realm. By ensuring a smooth succession, he avoided the civil conflicts that had destroyed other kingdoms of the 9th century. Wessex's military, political, and religious frameworks could operate independently of a single ruler, demonstrating that his victories were structural rather than sensational. Æthelwulf's approach redefined the idea of kingship. Success was measured not by conquest or fame, but by stability, preparation, and survival. The kingdom he preserved would continue to thrive, eventually shaping the history of England itself. Æthelwulf understood that survival required more than military might. His strategy was subtle: empower local leaders, integrate faith into governance, fortify settlements, and prepare heirs. These invisible victories ensured that Wessex could withstand crises without collapsing. The kingdom's institutions, nobles administering regions, clergy mediating disputes, and monasteries preserving knowledge, created a resilient framework. Decisions made decades earlier continued to protect the realm, proving that foresight and structure were as powerful as any sword. This approach was rare in a century of sudden raids, shifting alliances, and fragile dynasties. Æthelwulf's legacy lies in the continuity he engineered, a kingdom capable of responding to threats and passing power smoothly to the next generation. Æthelwulf's foresight extended directly to his children. By training them in governance, diplomacy, and military strategy, he created heirs capable of managing crises, commanding loyalty, and continuing the kingdom's stability. Alfred, Æthelred, and their brothers observed councils, studied military maps, and learned to mediate disputes effectively. This preparation reduced the risk of internal strife and succession disputes, a common cause of collapse in other kingdoms. Æthelwulf's careful mentoring allowed his successors to focus on strategy and reform, rather than crisis management. The result was a smooth transition of power and a resilient kingdom, ready to face external threats and internal challenges alike. His invisible guidance shaped the next generation, proving that mentorship and foresight can be as decisive as battles in determining a kingdom's survival. Religious authority was central to Æthelwulf's governance. Churches and monasteries were not just spiritual centers. They mediated disputes, preserved knowledge, and supported secular authority. Bishops and abbots reinforced legitimacy, advising rulers and maintaining loyalty among nobles. Æthelwulf cultivated relationships with the clergy, using moral authority to reinforce his decisions. Pilgrimages and alliances with continental religious figures enhanced Wessex's prestige and influence beyond England. By embedding religious legitimacy into governance, Æthelwulf created a dual framework: moral and political, spiritual and administrative. This integration ensured that Wessex could endure crises, maintain social cohesion, and resist internal fragmentation. Faith was a stabilizing force, strengthening both ruler and kingdom, and providing a platform for future generations to inherit a cohesive and resilient state. By the mid-9th century, Æthelwulf had ensured that Wessex was prepared for the challenges of the next generation. His sons inherited a kingdom with clear succession, competent local governance, fortified towns, and disciplined militias. Administrative structures allowed for efficient taxation, law enforcement, and communication across the realm. Religious institutions reinforced authority and social cohesion. The kingdom's resilience enabled it to face Viking raids and internal disputes with coordinated responses rather than chaos. Æthelwulf's invisible victories, training heirs, delegating authority, integrating faith, and fortifying settlements, were instrumental in this preparedness. This groundwork directly facilitated Alfred the Great's future successes, from military victories to cultural reforms. Æthelwulf's subtle strategies demonstrate that enduring leadership often requires restraint, patience, and forward-thinking vision, rather than immediate glory. In examining his reign, we see that true power is measured not only in conquest, but in stability, continuity, and the ability to preserve a kingdom for future generations. Æthelwulf's Wessex was a model of strategic foresight, preparing the stage for a transformative era in English history. By the later years of Æthelwulf's influence, Wessex had become a model of security and continuity. Fortified towns and coastal defenses reduced vulnerability to Viking raids. Nobles governed their regions with authority and loyalty, while trained militias were ready to respond to threats. Monasteries provided education, moral guidance, and local administration, reinforcing both social cohesion and political stability. Æthelwulf's attention to delegation ensured that no single person, other than the king himself, was indispensable. Local and regional leaders could act decisively, reducing the kingdom's reliance on central authority. This invisible strength allowed Wessex to endure periods of instability that would have destroyed other kingdoms. Æthelwulf's vision created a resilient framework, balancing governance, defense, and faith, and providing a foundation for the next generation to inherit a kingdom capable of both survival and growth. Æthelwulf's reign demonstrates the power of invisible victories. Unlike rulers celebrated for conquest, he focused on the systems that preserved life, ensured loyalty, and prepared successors. Administrative structures, trained heirs, fortified settlements, and integrated religious authority allowed Wessex to endure in a turbulent century. These victories were subtle and often overlooked in historical accounts, yet they were essential. Without this careful groundwork, later kings, including Alfred the Great, would have faced a fragmented and vulnerable kingdom. Æthelwulf's leadership was quiet but strategic, emphasizing resilience over immediate glory. The survival of Wessex in a period marked by raids, dynastic disputes, and political uncertainty is a testament to this approach. The structures Æthelwulf created directly enabled Alfred the Great's later successes. By ensuring competent heirs, fortifying towns, and embedding effective governance, Æthelwulf left Alfred a kingdom capable of organized response, reform, and cultural development. Military and administrative systems were already in place, allowing Alfred to focus on strategy and innovation rather than crisis management. Æthelwulf's foresight transformed leadership from personal charisma into institutional stability. His subtle strategies, mentorship, delegation, and integration of faith, prepared Wessex to face the challenges of the late 9th century with confidence. Without this foundation, Alfred's achievements might have been impossible. Æthelwulf's quiet victories were therefore not only crucial to his own reign, but to the survival and advancement of an entire kingdom. Æthelwulf teaches us that leadership is not always measured by visible victories. Survival, preparation, and foresight can be more impactful than dramatic conquest. His reign shows that true power lies in creating systems capable of enduring crises and maintaining loyalty. Delegation, mentorship, integration of faith, and fortification were the tools of his success. Each decision reinforced the kingdom's resilience. Æthelwulf's ability to balance authority with prudence ensured that Wessex could endure attacks, manage internal affairs, and pass smoothly to the next generation. In an era defined by instability, his choices transformed Wessex into a kingdom that could withstand challenges others could not. His legacy is a testament to the effectiveness of invisible victories, demonstrating that the most enduring leadership is often quiet, deliberate, and generational in its impact. As we conclude this chapter of Æthelwulf's story, his legacy becomes clear. He was a king whose greatest victories were unseen. Survival, stability, and preparation defined his reign. Fortified towns, loyal nobles, integrated religious authority, and well-prepared heirs were the foundation upon which future generations would build. Æthelwulf's foresight ensured that Wessex endured Viking raids, political uncertainty, and potential dynastic crises. The kingdom he preserved allowed Alfred the Great to inherit a resilient, unified realm, capable of both defense and reform. History often overlooks such rulers, favoring spectacle over substance. Yet Æthelwulf's subtle, generational impact demonstrates that leadership is not always about immediate glory. Sometimes, the quiet work of preserving life, fostering loyalty, and preparing successors leaves the most lasting mark on history. In examining his reign, we see that true power is measured not by fame or conquest, but by endurance, foresight, and the ability to create a kingdom capable of surviving beyond one ruler's lifetime. Æthelwulf's story reminds us that the most transformative victories are often invisible, but profoundly enduring. Æthelwulf's reign invites reflection on the nature of leadership. He ruled during a period of uncertainty, Viking raids, shifting alliances, and the fragility of dynastic succession threatened kingdoms across Europe. Yet Wessex endured. This survival was no accident. It was the result of deliberate, patient, and strategic planning. He understood that true leadership was not always visible or celebrated. The most impactful victories were often invisible. Delegating authority to capable sons, integrating religious influence into governance, fortifying settlements, and ensuring the continuity of administration. By doing so, he created a kingdom that could function even in his absence. Wessex became a resilient political entity, capable of responding to crises, maintaining loyalty, and surviving pressures that toppled neighboring realms. In a sense, Æthelwulf's legacy is timeless. Preparation, foresight, and invisible victories can shape history as decisively as conquest or fame. His reign demonstrates that leadership is most powerful when it ensures the survival, stability, and future prosperity of a kingdom. Æthelwulf's greatest triumph may have been the preparation of his sons. By teaching governance, diplomacy, and military strategy, he ensured that each heir could manage crises and maintain loyalty. Alfred, Æthelred, and their brothers observed councils, reviewed strategies, and learned to balance authority with restraint. This foresight minimized the risk of internal conflict, a common cause of collapse in other kingdoms. Wessex could continue functioning smoothly, even after Æthelwulf's death, because his heirs were trained and confident. The continuity of power he engineered allowed the kingdom to face external threats with a united front. Every aspect of governance, from fortified towns to coordinated militias and loyal nobles, reflected his strategic vision. Through mentorship and preparation, Æthelwulf transformed leadership from personal authority into sustainable governance. His work illustrates that leadership is measured not only by battles won, but by the kingdom's resilience and the next generation's readiness to carry forward the legacy. Faith was central to Æthelwulf's approach to governance. Monasteries and churches were not just spiritual centers. They acted as hubs for administration, education, and social cohesion. Clergy mediated disputes, advised rulers, and reinforced the moral authority of the crown. Æthelwulf's relationship with bishops and abbots created legitimacy that extended beyond Wessex. Pilgrimages, including his journey to Rome, strengthened alliances with continental religious authorities and enhanced Wessex's prestige. The integration of faith into governance ensured social cohesion, reinforced loyalty, and strengthened the kingdom's ability to withstand crises. By combining moral authority with political power, Æthelwulf created a dual framework of legitimacy that stabilized Wessex and prepared it for future challenges. This strategic integration of religion demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of statecraft. Æthelwulf's leadership was not merely about survival. It was about building a resilient, morally grounded, and administratively capable kingdom that would endure through the turbulence of the 9th century. Viking raids continued to threaten England, but Wessex was prepared. Fortified towns, regional militias, and trained leadership allowed the kingdom to respond quickly and effectively. Communication between local and central authorities ensured coordinated action, reducing vulnerability. Æthelwulf's policies, delegation of power, mentorship of heirs, and investment in fortifications paid dividends even after his death. The kingdom could absorb attacks without collapse, demonstrating the strategic foresight that characterized his reign. The resilience of Wessex underlines the importance of invisible victories. While chronicles often focus on dramatic battles or heroic deeds, Æthelwulf's subtle work, mentorship, administration, defense, and integration of faith ensured survival and continuity, allowing future generations to build on a stable foundation. Æthelwulf's influence extended far beyond his lifetime. By creating a stable, resilient kingdom, he prepared Wessex for the challenges of Alfred the Great's era. His sons inherited not only land, but competence, loyalty, and a functioning administrative system. Fortified towns, disciplined militias, and integrated religious authority provided the tools necessary to survive and eventually repel Viking invasions. The continuity and foresight built by Æthelwulf allowed Wessex to become the foundation for a unified England. His reign demonstrates that subtle, long-term strategies can be more impactful than immediate glory or battlefield heroics. History may overlook kings like Æthelwulf, yet their legacies shape the course of nations. Survival, stability, preparation, and foresight, his invisible victories, allowed a small kingdom to endure, grow, and lay the groundwork for a transformative era in English history. In understanding Æthelwulf, we see that true leadership often works quietly behind the scenes, creating structures, mentoring successors, and building resilience that outlasts any single ruler. His story reminds us that the most enduring impact is often invisible, yet profoundly transformative. As we approach the end of Æthelwulf's story, his quiet yet profound influence becomes clear. He ruled in an era of danger and uncertainty, when Viking raids and fragile dynasties threatened kingdoms across England. Yet through careful planning, mentorship, and institution building, Wessex survived where other kingdoms fell. Æthelwulf's victories were invisible. Fortified towns, trained heirs, loyal nobles, and an integrated religious system ensured continuity. He prepared not just for the present, but for decades of future challenges, creating a kingdom that could endure without him at the helm. His reign reminds us that leadership is more than battles won or lands conquered. True leadership is the ability to preserve, to foresee, to prepare, and to create a legacy that endures. Æthelwulf built Wessex as a kingdom that could function independently of a single ruler. Nobles administered regions effectively. Soldiers and militias were trained and ready. Monasteries and churches reinforced moral and political authority. Even in times of crisis, communication and structure allowed for coordinated responses. This careful planning created a resilient system. Wessex could endure Viking attacks, maintain loyalty, and pass smoothly to the next generation. Æthelwulf's foresight ensured that his children, including Alfred, would inherit not just land, but competence, stability, and authority. His reign demonstrates that survival, preparation, and governance can be more decisive than immediate fame or battlefield heroics. In an age of uncertainty, Æthelwulf's invisible victories allowed Wessex to thrive and set the stage for a transformative era in English history. The most enduring aspect of Æthelwulf's reign was his preparation of the next generation. Through mentorship, education, and strategic delegation, he ensured that his sons could govern effectively, respond to crises, and maintain cohesion among nobles. Alfred the Great and his siblings inherited a kingdom capable of coordinated defense, political stability, and cultural growth. This generational vision transformed leadership from a personal authority into an enduring institution. Wessex's resilience was not dependent on one man, but on systems, loyalty, and preparation. Æthelwulf's subtle decisions created the conditions for future success, allowing the kingdom to evolve and eventually contribute to the unification of England. The quiet work of kings like Æthelwulf often goes uncelebrated, yet it shapes the course of history. His reign illustrates that foresight, preparation, and institutional strength can be more decisive than immediate fame or dramatic conquest. Æthelwulf's reign teaches a timeless lesson. The most profound victories are often invisible. Survival, preparation, delegation, and foresight ensured that Wessex could endure crises without collapse. Fortified towns, trained militias, loyal nobles, and integrated religious authority created a kingdom capable of responding to both internal and external pressures. These subtle, deliberate strategies made it possible for future generations, including Alfred the Great, to achieve legendary success. The quiet work of administration, mentorship, and strategic planning is as critical to history as battles and conquests. Æthelwulf demonstrates that leadership is not always dramatic, but it can be transformative. By focusing on continuity and resilience, he preserved life, strengthened authority, and created the conditions for a kingdom to flourish beyond his own lifetime. As we conclude, Æthelwulf emerges as a king whose quiet, deliberate strategies shaped the course of English history. He ruled in an era of turbulence, yet Wessex survived and prospered. His invisible victories, preparing heirs, fortifying towns, strengthening institutions, and integrating faith, ensured the kingdom's stability and resilience. The systems he established allowed Alfred the Great and future generations to build upon a strong foundation. Æthelwulf's story reminds us that the most transformative leadership is often subtle. Success is measured not only in immediate glory, but in foresight, preparation, and the ability to create structures that endure beyond a single lifetime. The legacy of Æthelwulf is Wessex itself, a kingdom that withstood Viking invasions, maintained internal cohesion, and laid the groundwork for the eventual unification of England. His life demonstrates that true power often works behind the scenes, quietly shaping the future while history remembers only the visible triumphs. In understanding Æthelwulf, we see the enduring value of patience, strategy, and invisible victories. The quiet king of Wessex may not have wielded fame like a sword, but his foresight carved the path for centuries of English history. Conclusion: the legacy of Æthelwulf may not be the king whose name echoes in songs of heroism or battlefield glory, yet his reign is a testament to the power of foresight, preparation, and invisible victories. In a century defined by Viking raids, fragile dynasties, and political uncertainty, Æthelwulf transformed Wessex from a vulnerable kingdom into a resilient, enduring state. Through mentorship of his heirs, fortification of towns, integration of faith into governance, and the careful creation of institutions, he ensured the kingdom could survive crises and thrive beyond his own lifetime. The true measure of his success lies not in conquest, but in continuity. Wessex endured, and Alfred the Great inherited a kingdom ready to defend itself, reform itself, and shape the future of England. Æthelwulf's legacy reminds us that leadership is not always dramatic. Sometimes, the quiet, deliberate work behind the scenes leaves the most lasting mark on history. His story teaches a timeless lesson. Vision, patience, and strategic preparation can shape nations, long after the ruler has passed. Æthelwulf, the quiet king of Wessex, achieved a legacy that resonates through centuries, proving that invisible victories are often the most profound.